So I'm joined today by Isaac, who runs a channel called IZ World, and we're gonna. Yeah, he made a video about antinatalism. I can't remember how long ago it was now. Um,
I think it
do
was
you remember?
almost 2 years now.
Yeah, so a
It's
while
old.
ago. Yeah, exactly. So that's how desperate I am for content, obviously. um, but basically, I can't remember who, but someone a while ago, maybe a couple of months ago or something, when just before I first reached out to you for this, they sent me your video and said, "Oh, can you do a response to this guy?" I don't know if they watch your channel normally or if they just stumbled across your video. I can't actually remember who it was. So I just took a look at your video, and sometimes when I watch someone's video who they've made one about antinatalism, and I think that there's a chance they'll reply. If it's a channel with like 2 million subscribers, they're not replying to me. So I
Of
don't even
course.
bother. Yeah, exactly. But if it's someone that I get the vibe that they will, at least reply to my message or be open to it, I'll maybe drop them a message. So I did that, and here we are. Um the I wanted, before we actually get into stuff, I actually wanted to just ask some just more interest questions about, like, how did you actually first hear about antinatalism?
So it's a little funny. The first time I ever heard of antinatalism, I was on a job site.
Oh.
Um, I was walking, like crawling through a maintenance tunnel,
Yeah.
and there was two guys underneath me who they were real bad stoners.
Oh, yeah,
And so they're sitting there smoking weed, and I'm listening to their conversation while plugging some junction boxes in, and they were talking about it.
Mm.
And so that was the first time I really heard about it. And I'm like, that is an interesting concept. I'll look into it.
Mm.
And so that's what really started it. Because it wasn't anything that I heard of before.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I just kind of wanted to learn more about it. And it prompted me to make the video. So,
Yeah. No, I mean, I was kind of the same. I mean, I wasn't crawling anywhere and then come across two stoner guys or whatever. Like, I was just like walking around, and actually initially heard about it from overhearing a conversation. So actually the same as you overheard their conversation. Um, but I actually didn't have like the initiative to look it up afterwards. I then, a bit later, came across another person who knew about it, and then I just had a conversation with them. So slightly different, but it's like interesting that we both overheard like a conversation. Um and you were saying when we were messaging before to like set this up, you mentioned that, I'm guessing after you made the video, you'd had some interactions with antinatalists before, because I think you were maybe like kind of hesitant to talk to me. Maybe I don't want to put like words or anything in your mouth, but it seemed like you'd had negative experiences before. What interactions have you had before?
I spoke with Stephen Godfrey.
Yeah,
He was the first person I spoke to,
yeah, yeah,
which wasn't exactly a positive experience. He came
yeah,
off a little strong. I'll put it that way.
yeah,
I then spoke to Illicit Mind, and I actually had a pretty cordial conversation with him.
yeah.
Um, so those are the two big people that I've had like actual talks with.
Mm.
But shoot, after that email, the response that I got, I mean, the email, the video, after the
Yeah,
video that I
yeah,
made,
yeah.
the response that I got through emails and other stuff was, I had figured, I wasn't expecting anybody to see it.
Mm.
And I'm like, damn, I'm only like 3 videos into my channel and I've already getting death threats in the email. And I'm like, man, shoot, wasn't expecting this so quick.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I was like, well, shoot, maybe I should back off from this a little bit and let it cool down before I
yeah,
think
yeah.
about it.
Yeah, like, I'm assuming, so like you got attention from the video and stuff. I'm guessing it was all from Antinatalist, I'm guessing.
Mostly. Yeah, I think the
Mhm.
like to dislike ratio was like,
Oh, did it get ratioed?
yeah, bad. Like
Oh.
85% dislikes to the video. So I was like,
Oh, really?
I said, well, apparently, I mean, that was kind of the point. It
Yeah.
wasn't well made by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was cobbled together in like 30 minutes, one
Yeah, yeah.
take. So it was like, I wasn't expecting any sort of positivity whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so it was like, okay, I got what I expected, but I didn't know that I was going to get any
Yeah,
actual
that level.
response. Yeah. And it
Yeah,
wasn't a
yeah.
huge response, but it still was much more than I was anticipating.
Yeah, for an early video on a channel, like I think you said it was your third video or something, like for a third video, it's if you're already getting death threats by your third video, it's it's a lively one.
Yes, I was like,
um
"Dang, shoot."
yeah, yeah. And like obviously for anyone listening, like don't send anyone death threats like on any topic. It's just like I mean, even if you're well, first of all, if you're trying to like scare them, like you're a random person on the internet who's probably in a basement. So like you're not going to be scaring anyone. And second of all, if you're trying to change their mind, death threats probably aren't the best way to go about it, right? So I just feel like all round death threats on the way. But talking about how you were saying you didn't expect to get that reaction, like I've noticed on a decent amount, not on like massive channels that have hundreds of thousands of subscribers or millions. If they make a video on antinatalism, like their video tends to get lots of views, like all of their other videos. Um,
Yeah.
but a smaller channel like one of ours, if a smaller channel makes a video on antinatalism, it tends to get, from like what I've seen, it tends to get above average views. And the reason I think that is because not many people know about antinatalism or care about it, but the people who are antinatalists, they will go around and watch every video. So if
Yes.
you so if you put a video out on it, it will get a almost guaranteed number of views because everyone who's typing in antinatalism is going to come and watch it. But obviously in bigger channels that gets drowned out because it's not actually that many people. But if your channel isn't used to, large amounts of views, that will show up
It's
as
like a
like a blip.
good like almost 3,000 people.
Mm. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's like or at least that's how many views you get. It's like it was an up because I usually get like 75 views at
yeah,
maximum.
yeah. We because we have no lives, we go around scouring the internet for everything with even half the word in it. No, that's a joke. Like, just to, I mean, if 'cause I don't know, like who, if anyone will come over from your channel and watch this, who's interested, or the people who have seen your video who aren't antinatalists, but yeah, like it's a joke about people not having lives. Some people won't have lives, others will. Like there is a stereotype of antinatalists out there, that they're sort of like basement dweller, loser, emo, doomer sort of people. But like most of them, like including myself, we just, we have day jobs, normal, whatever, go around. We just happen to have this like opinion that is, should we say, different
Yes.
from other
And I'll say
people.
I've had interesting conversations with both demographics where it's like
Mm,
I've met a lot of people like yourself and you seem like you're a very beneficial person to society. You seem well
thank you.
balanced. And then I've talked to some people who it's like, wow, man.
I also wish you weren't born.
Oh, maybe not go that far, but it's like maybe work out your trauma with your parents before you start making your
Yeah.
full, world philosophy.
Yeah, yeah, I can get that. I mean, not even just trauma with your parents, although a lot of people's trauma does come from their parents. But it's just like as soon as you start looking into trauma, you realize that a lot of the behavior that people have in just normal life is driven by trauma. Conflict avoidance or seeking external validation, all of this sort of stuff. Like it's like very common. I think it's very underrated how important trauma is in how our lives are shapen and how we
Yeah.
interact with each other and stuff. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to cover those sort of intro things before we get into stuff because yeah, I just thought I'm always interested in people who aren't antinatalist who will make a video on it, and then you'd mentioned that you'd had some interaction with people before, but yeah, let's get on to the actual video. So the video, I'm not going to get it word for word correct, but it's something like antinatalism is cringe,
Of course.
something something. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's my title I do for all of them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, I get it. It's like a series on is, X cringe or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um and when I messaged you, you'd said that it's been like 2 years since you made that video. So obviously like I mean, people change in 2 years. If you haven't changed in 2 years, then you need to fucking reconsider your life. But
Absolutely.
yeah, so obviously you've changed since making that video, and you said your opinions may have slightly changed. So yeah, what's your kind of looking back on or what's your opinion now on antinatalism generally, and what's your view on the video looking back on it as you stand now?
So antinatalism, to me, I will admit I still don't agree with the philosophy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but to me it seems like it comes from a good place.
Mm,
Like I could definitely understand the mentality behind why people would think that way.
mm,
Um, and so it's like I can rationalize it. When I had
mm.
made the video, I couldn't rationalize it at all.
Yeah.
Um, but I can understand where it's coming from, and it's the reason why I'm probably a lot less negative towards it, like
Mm,
specifically negative towards it. But I don't agree with it.
mm,
Uh, but I will fully admit I'm a creationist. I'm a Christian. My
mm,
philosophy is dictated by my faith,
mm,
and so there is a bit of a dissonance between me and some of the people I've debated with on the topic who are more nihilist or
mm,
gnostic or
mm.
whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually spoke to a guy before who, um, when he was thinking about antinatalism, he thought about it through a sort of religious lens, which I don't know. Would you say that um, because you said there's a bit of friction there because you're a creationist. So would you say that you view antinatalism from your religious framing, or even if you could kind of step out of your religious framing, do you think you'd still disagree with it?
I think I probably would. Actually, no. If I could step outside of my religious framing, I'd probably agree with it
Mm,
because I can't rationalize outside of a religious framework um, why like a nihilistic perspective wouldn't be more viable.
mm,
Where it's like, um, if there is no definitive actual purpose to life, well, I mean,
mm,
shoot, then there's no purpose to life. Then why
mm,
would we give undue suffering to people before they're born? Why
mm,
would we give birth to children? Because there'd be no purpose. There's no ultimate drive.
mm.
That
Right.
at that point it really would be undue suffering.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. What do you think? I got two questions. The first question is, and again, if you want to take one, and if you forget the second one, then just come back and I'll remind you of the second one. But the first one is, um, what do you think is the meaning or the purpose that sort of makes that suffering? What's it called? Compensates for that suffering. Um, and do you think that obviously you think it compensates for the suffering because you're the one saying it, but do you think that it's up to you or anyone else to say, I think this meaning and purpose compensates for the suffering? And I can also go further and say, I'm going to say on behalf of this other person who I'm going to create, who I don't actually know them. I don't know who they are. Like, I'm going to create them. Like, once I create them, I'll get to know them, obviously, because they're going to be my kid. But at this point, I've no idea who they are. Um, I get to decide for them that it also compensates them without being able to consult them in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, what do you think about those two? So the first one is, what is that purpose and meaning that compensates for it, and why does one person get to decide on behalf of another that it is compensatory?
Okay. So if I'm going to answer those questions, do you mind if I go on a tangent for just a little bit, right
Yeah,
quick?
yeah, do what you want. Yeah, yeah.
Because I those are very, very good questions, and I
Mm.
don't know if I can just answer them without giving context
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
my philosophy. Um, where it's like I wasn't always religious.
Mm,
I was nihilistic and very atheistic my entire childhood, and
mm,
then I kind of came into it. Um, and so my mentality always was is that I'm a physics mind. I love physics.
mm,
That's one of my favorite subjects.
Mm.
I got a degree in it for the heck of getting a degree in physics. Um, and so you have this constant issue in the universe where, you know, the laws of physics are very well defined. Matter's not created nor destroyed. It can transfer from a state of energy back to a state of matter, back and forth. You slowly see things becoming less and less complicated over time. Entropy, you know, takes up. And one of the biggest issues in physics is what started it. And because matter can't create itself, and if the universe has always existed for eternity, it would have already fallen into entropy by now. So you have like this question of why are we stuck in this framework where we're kind of really early on in the universe's life? Entropy
Mm.
really hasn't taken its toll on much. It's like I think we're a good maybe 14 billion years into the universe.
Mm.
And that is very young considering, you know, the potential of it being around for eternity. So something had to set it in motion. And I don't know if that something that set it in motion is necessarily a traditional view of a god, but it has to be something outside of the system in order to set the system into motion. And so that's my framework.
Mm.
That's how I started. And of course, like I said, I'm a Christian. I took on that. It when I looked into the ancient Hebrew texts, it's what lined up with my philosophy, and it checked off. If you read some of the old ancient um, Hebrew interpretations of the Old Testament, God looks a lot more like an eldritch abomination than he does a traditional viewpoint of a Western God. Um, so there's that, obviously, and because of that philosophy that I've pushed myself and dug into, because that's what I like to do. Um, the fight against entropy is a very important draft in Christianity. It's a very important draft to subdue and cultivate the area that we've been given. Um, and I don't know if that's necessarily talked about a lot in the modern church. I'm not a huge fan of most Christians, I'm going to be honest with you.
Mm.
Um, but there was a charge said that the cultivation of the earth not only brings about less suffering to people, the more people that are on the planet, the better we are at developing things that makes life less miserable. I mean, look at the difference between now and 100 years ago.
Mm.
I mean, shoot, right now it's like 105 degrees where I live with about, 98% humidity. But I can sit here and talk to you over the computer on the internet with air conditioning. I've got bottled beverages.
Mm.
Life is great as compared to 100 years ago in the Dust Bowl when people were walking outside and suffocating to death on sod and.
Mm.
And so we were only able to get to this point because of ingenuity of humanity and, you know, there's that. There's also less suffering from other things as well. Humanity is very good at, well, I mean, we're really good at destroying things, but ideally, humans
Mm.
are very good at cultivating Earth like a garden instead of nature by itself is very cruel.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in the country. I've seen some nasty crap.
Mm.
Um, I think my first introduction to how horrible nature could be was my family's dog was out in the woods and got mauled by coyotes.
Oh, really?
And I had to go out into the woods and put my dog down.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I was like, I think I was 8. And it's like, wow, okay. Nature's not, it's not like Pocahontas from
Yeah. Yeah.
Disney. And there's something about our ability to make decisions and cultivate things. You see, a garden is inherently more ordered than the woods backyard. I find that beautiful. A lot of people find that, anti-environmentalist.
Mm.
So my opinion is the reason that it is ethically justified to have children is because we're currently at a war against entropy,
Mm,
and it is ethically justified like the draft is ethically justified.
mm. So the purpose is essentially being to, for want of a better phrase, like foot soldiers in the war against entropy.
Yes. To cultivate and make the world a better place,
Mm.
because without us, it would be a lot worse of a place.
Right, yeah. So, just so I'm fully understanding, when you say a fight against entropy, um, what does that actually look like? So, maybe to frame it in a different way, if humans were to, let's say, go extinct tomorrow, and entropy were to go on, unhindered, what would that look like, and what would be bad about it?
Most likely, I mean, you can look at through like the fossil record. 98% of all extinction level events happened naturally without humans involved.
Mm,
In fact, when humans started doing things, extinction events and uh, species preservation increased dramatically. The fact that like only, I mean, a relatively minimal amount of different creatures go extinct every year is
mm,
largely due to prevention efforts done by humanity. Um, because we're the only thing that cares.
mm,
Uh, a, a dire wolf doesn't care if the bison die out.
mm,
That's that's not in their concern at all. I mean, we're
right,
the only people who care about the ethics of having children.
mm,
I mean, we're the only people who care about whether this earth sticks around or not.
mm.
Now,
And
granted, there's a lot of people who don't, but
yeah, yeah.
we're the only people who do.
Yeah, and I got a quick question about that. So, you know how you were saying before how we sort of idolize nature a lot, and this could be because of the media we consume, the documentaries we consume, all of this sort of stuff, but also just the fact that we are often disconnected from it. um Not disconnected in the way that we have no impact on it. We do have an impact on it, but disconnected in the way that we can live our lives where we don't meaningfully interact with it. A lot of us live in cities now. I believe maybe over half of humans live in cities now. I might have that wrong, but
I'd
a lot
believe it.
yeah, a lot of us live in cities now, so we are very disconnected from um, the wild. So I think there's a collection of reasons why people have an idealized view of nature, and I 100% agree on with you on that. Um, but my question is, you were saying that like nature in the wild is a tough um, and I don't know how you describe it, horrible place, harsh place, something like this. Um, but then you were saying that the thing that justifies us imposing suffering on a new person is to help maintain that horrible place that is nature. Because I think what you were saying is to fight against entropy is to maintain species and I'm assuming what you meant by that is maintain the natural order of things. But before you were saying that that natural order is horrible and terrible. So aren't we imposing suffering on humans just to maintain something that we also think is bad?
That's a great question. I don't think I explained myself fantastically.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't believe nature is horrible. In fact,
Mm,
I love it. I've always. I mean, I don't think I have ever lived in a. I've never lived in a city.
mm,
Um, I think the biggest town I've lived near is Longview, which is about. I think it's like 800,000 people in it.
yeah.
I've always lived well in the sticks, in the boonies, way off in the country.
Mm,
Um, and so I nature's cruel, but it is not terrible.
mm,
Um, and humans, the reason why I think we're important is, well, we're not maintaining nature, we're subduing nature. A garden is not the same thing as going out in the woods and picking berries.
okay.
We are inherently establishing order and um, creating a better system than already exists naturally. I mean,
Okay.
I've run a vineyard the majority of my life, And something that you'll learn about in a vineyard is when you are pruning the
Mm.
grapevines, they operate best when you have two rows of wire that you've cinched, and they have a lower cord and an upper cord, which basically you have four branches.
Yeah.
Everything else you cut off. Um, it's very unnatural to the plant. It
Mm.
fights you 24/7. But if you prune it just right and prepare it like that, it is the healthiest it can be. It grows more fruit. The fruit tastes better.
Mm.
It's better for the animals that are eating off of those plants, although it's annoying when they do that because
Mm.
I want to eat those grapes.
Mm.
But um, it what looks like a cruel order as a human, like, oh, I'm going to walk in, I'm just going to cut all these branches up and I'm going to make it look like I want it to look, is actually significantly better for the plant than if it was just to grow on the ground.
Mm.
That is my mentality of humans going into nature and cultivating it, where it's the Great Plains was a bunch of grass, but we've made it into the breadbasket of the entire world.
Right. Yeah. I think I misunderstood you before. So let me repeat it to make sure I'm understanding what you mean. So essentially, what you're saying is that nature, um, which obviously existed before humans were around, if it were to stay in that state, it would be a cruel place. But with the presence of humans, we have not restored because it wasn't there before, but we have imposed some sense of artificial control or order on the cruel state of nature essentially. And so the argument is that whilst an antinatalist may say that we're imposing suffering on someone by creating them, they are contributing to um, a essentially overall good because we are putting essentially like a leash on nature to some extent.
You are creating good outside. You're part of something larger than yourself,
Mm, okay.
which I think is a little dangerous to say, but um, it's it's part of my rationalization
Mm,
because now, granted, that creates a huge responsibility for the person who's going to have children.
mm,
That's a huge responsibility. I'm not just saying that anybody with a crack pipe and a woman around should be able to have pump out 12 babies.
mm,
I think that is inherently a immoral thing to do.
mm,
But the response, like I say, I say to people around me all the time, every child deserves two parents, but not every parent deserves a child. Um, and it's you have a responsibility as a person who is going to be bringing children into the world to um, raise them well. You have a responsibility to treat them well. You have a responsibility to prepare them for what they're going to face in the world because it's a difficult place. Your job is to not be the trauma that's going to
mm,
hurt them later in life.
mm. Yeah. Do do you think that, and I think I kind of know your answer, but do you think that people are actually doing that at the moment? Because so what you're saying is that obviously like to in creating people we are essentially fighting this war on entropy, which what that looks like in real terms is putting like a leash on nature and essentially trying to get it to be less cruel. um do you think that in practicality, in practice, that is actually what's happening? Do you think people are actually doing that?
No, I think any philosophy has an ideal that
Mm,
is going to be inherently not met.
mm.
I mean,
And
just
so
look at any
yeah, yeah.
philosophy.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I get you. But so if what we're doing is talking about ideals, but the person you're creating is being brought into the practice, and in the practice it isn't actually happening like that, is the ideal a justification for forcing that suffering on the person who, in practice, very likely won't actually do anything?
I would say yes, simply because the act of having children is the creation of a nation.
Yeah.
And if you look at the majority of people who are causing the most problems to our generation, none of them are having kids either. So 2 or 3 generations and they'll be gone.
Who
And
are those
what's
people?
I would say that there is a very large Gnostic mentality inside of our inside just the world at large. A very I would hesitate to say nihilistic, but
Yeah.
definitely self-centered because it's not necessarily nihilistic. I see it in religious folks a lot too,
Yeah.
where it's like this poverty mindset where you don't know when you're going to get your next real good moment in life, so you got
Mm.
to take what you can right now and not give to anybody else.
Mm.
Uh, I think a lot of, I mean, I don't want to talk too much about current events,
Mm.
but we all remember what happened in 2020.
Yeah.
There was two sides to that whole debate, and neither of them were great to talk to.
Mm. Yeah. No, I get what you mean. So do you do you not think, because sometimes because I speak to a lot of people about antinatalism, and there are a lot of people who actually bring up arguments similar to yours. They don't come at it from a religious angle, um, but there is a common argument that often actually vegans make. And I
Really?
think, yeah, you mention veganism in your video, I think, sort of tangentially. Um, there's a common argument that I hear from some vegans, which is that they also actually, because obviously vegans tend to care about animals. Um, I'm not sure if vegans do. Think vegans do tend to care about animals more than the average person, right?
Yes,
Or
that tends to be the dichotomy.
yeah, or at least they put their care into practice more than the average person. Because a lot of people do care about other animals. They just don't tend to put that into practice in as much. You know, they may, I don't know, they may donate to like a dog shelter or something. Um, but for vegans, it's much more of a an important principle for them, right?
Yeah,
And the argument that I often hear from that sort of sphere is there's two things. The first one is that we need to create uh, specifically vegan babies so that they can continue the fight to help get animals out of farms and laboratories and places like this, right? Um,
yeah,
which is similar to your argument. It's essentially saying we need to create people to carry on a fight to make the world a better place in some way. And the other one that's even more similar to what you're saying is that they actually, because they care about animals and they also see nature as very cruel, they say that we need to have more um, babies so that those babies will go on to have a net positive impact on the natural world, whether that be through some form of activism or just the fact that they are consuming resources that mean there's less land mass with the wild animals and nature on it because there's farmland instead, because that person needs farmland to produce resources for them to live. um, so there's this similar sort of line that often people um, talk about. And one thing that I often think about when people say this, and I'll say it to you now, is why does your mind jump straight to, so we've got this, essentially we've got this problem that we want to alleviate or maybe solve one day, although I'm not sure this problem will ever be solved. I think we can just alleviate it. um, why does your mind jump straight to we need to create more people to do that, if there is a large amount of people out there who already exist and either don't know about the issue because they've been brainwashed by media, or they are just somewhat apathetic at the moment, but we could invigorate them to do something about it and care? Would it not be a more effective course of action to set up a foundation or go around doing talks or something like that to influence these people, then suck up all your time bottle feeding one person, and then raising them until they're 18 or 20 or however long you're going to raise them for. It seems like if you actually cared deeply about this cause, you would put your efforts elsewhere than to raise your own children. What do you think about that?
I actually agree. Um, However, I also believe that people can do more than one thing at a time.
Mm,
I think that in the part of while raising a child, you can do those other things as well. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. But that's not really the reason I would emphasize children simply is because as a species, antinatalists are getting what they want. We're way below replacement level,
mm,
way below replacement level. Our species is on the verge of, I mean, not on the verge, but our pyramid has declined.
yeah.
Our We have an inverted population pyramid. Once the with the baby boomers
Mm,
get to an age that they can't work anymore, our society is basically going to collapse because we'll have a lot more people taking from the system than putting into it
mm,
because they are the current largest generation and there's just not enough real workers to take care of all of them and also take care of society. Um, so because I mean, when people talk about overpopulation being a problem, overpopulation would be a problem if I mean, because think about it, replacement level is every single person having a child to replace them,
mm,
just one. So every couple has to have two kids.
yeah.
Otherwise, you're not at replacement level. Um, I mean, how many couples do you know personally who are childless?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, being either intentionally without children or unintentionally is definitely rising. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I remember the online movement, the dual income, no kids with a dog.
yeah. Dink plus
Yes,
dog. Yeah,
which I try to say the whole acronym because I cannot say dinkwad without it sounding like an insult. And so it's like, oh man, I really don't want to be doing that.
yeah.
But it sounds like a slur. But
It does sound weird whenever I hear people say whenever, because often people use it in just a matter of fact way and say, "Oh, there's a dink over there," or "There's some dinks over there," or whatever. It does sound like a derogatory term.
yeah, it does. It straight up sounds like a slur, and I'm like, whoa, what are we saying now? Is this some new terminology that I don't know about?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But no, I see it very often. We're below replacement rate. I think we have per every one person. I think we have 1.1 child in America,
Mm,
which means in one generation we've halved our population.
mm,
So when it comes to having children, it's give us 30 years, and those people who just don't hear about the cause and didn't want to hear, they'll be gone.
mm,
So and I think a really good, well, really issue is we take for granted the society that we live in.
mm,
It's like I've worked, you know, I've done a little bit of everything. I'm a bit of a handyman. And if you see how many people it takes to build a house, how much education is required just to build a house
mm,
with power and plumbing and insulating and all that. So it takes like at least 50 different trades to make a house.
mm.
And so you're going to have at least, 200 people from one side to the other come in there and fix up your house. And that's
Yeah,
just houses.
yeah. It's like, is it Milton Friedman who used the famous example of the pencil? Of
Hmm.
like a pencil is like a representation of how complex our global system has become, because the lead will come from some place, and the wood and the paint finish and the metal at the top and the rubber, etc. It comes from all over the world, and no one person is going to have the skill to from scratch build this pencil, but in a decentralized way it all comes together to produce a pencil.
And we
I feel
produce millions of them,
Yeah, and it's
mass
like,
producing
yeah.
them, just punching them out. I think a real good example was I heard of a guy who tried to make a toaster, and he wasn't allowed to buy anything. If he wanted the
Mm.
metal, he had to go dig it out of the ground,
Yeah.
and it took him like 15 years.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
toaster looked like crap, but it could toast bread.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think we take for granted that we have a society at all. And I'm actually not positive we can survive a halving of the population without everything that we consider normal completely falling apart.
Mm. So do you think, because I agree with you, it does look like, even though the population is the highest it's ever been, that's kind of hiding the fact that in many places there is a very low birth rate, right? So we're going to see the effects of that in the decades to come. Now, some people may say that's positive, some may say it's negative, but um, you seem like someone who's saying that that is a negative thing. Do
It's
you
not
think?
necessarily negative. It's going to change a lot.
Yeah.
It's going to change the world um, neutrally. We're going to it's going to change the world. Um,
You don't think it will reduce our capacity to do this venture of going out and changing nature?
it will. Um, it will definitely change that. But the thing is, like I said, I'm religious,
Mm,
and so that what kind of comes with that package is you look for reasons behind things and patterns.
mm,
And so it sounds naive from a scientific perspective. I know because I think of myself as naive a lot. Um, but you can sit back and go, huh, this is an interesting thing that's happening. I wonder why this is happening. And
mm,
then look for opportunities to do your charge in that point.
mm,
Um, and so if everybody else stops having children, except for the people who legitimately want to make the world a better place and legitimately care for their children and want the best for their children, then the only children that are born are ones who are going to live great lives and help the world.
but do you think that's the case? Because the way that I see it, like with the people I interact with, which are just everyday normal people, the vast majority of people who have kids just have them because it's the normal thing to do. It's not because of
Mhm.
some grand reason of wanting to make the world a better place. It's either just for a selfish reason of like, I want one of those, so I'm going to
Yes.
make one. Or they're just on autopilot, like they don't think about it. It's just something that kind of happens rather than it's a specific decision they've made.
A little personal bit of my family. We have personal experience with that because my three younger siblings. My mother wasn't able to have. She could barely give birth at all. I was removed by cesarean section.
Mm,
Um, and so she didn't try. It was going to kill her
yeah.
if she tried. Um, and so instead, we decided to adopt. That was
Yeah.
our family's charge. We have three younger children in my family that came from exactly what you're talking about.
Mm.
I mean, my youngest brother was born addicted to methamphetamines and cocaine,
Oh, wow.
out of the birth canal, addicted to it.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, that's just how it is. When you live in a poorer area, you're going to have a lot of people who
Yeah.
abuse drugs. And I think while I love my siblings, I don't think any child deserves that to be the entrance to the world they make. Now,
Mm.
that's not me saying I wish that my siblings were never born. I love them. But not everybody gets the opportunity that they got
Mm.
to be saved from that and pulled out somewhere else.
Yeah. And so do you
Um,
think
a
that
lot
the
of kids have to
yeah.
suffer their entire childhood because their parents are like that. Yeah, no kid deserves to be born inside of a meth house.
Yeah.
Um, it's it's a horrible, horrible existence, and it is completely preventable.
Mm.
Um, so it's like the solace for that is that generally people are having in that particular case, yeah, it is a good thing. People are having less children. That would probably be where my perspective has changed in the past 2 years,
Mm, mm.
where it's like, no, it actually is a good thing that the trend is downwards because there's less of those examples. I
Yeah, yeah.
wouldn't say it's bad in general, but I would say in a vast majority of cases that we see around in modern society, yes, it is probably pretty bad.
So about that, we can of it like let's remove it from your family because I don't think it's good
Of
to like
course.
specifically
Yeah.
put, but just generally a child born into bad conditions. I would agree with you. It's better for them, not to have been born in the first place. Um, but what what can you explain to me? Because I don't know if this intersects with your religious views at all, but can you explain to me why you think those specific examples are actually not acceptable?
Because that is an example of, well, I'll be honest, because most of those kids die.
Mm,
Most of those kids die horrible, horrible deaths. And if they don't die horrible, horrible deaths, the traumas and abuse that they experience in life and the fact that they have readily access to drugs at all times, they
mm,
are going to end up probably exactly like their parents did.
mm, mm,
Because their parents are only like that usually because they had parents who were addicted to drugs.
mm.
And it's just a downward spiral. At least that's in my area. That's the usual turn of events.
Yeah. But and I totally get where you're coming from, that a lot of those kids will die often in horrible ways. Um and I agree that is for me that's one of many reasons why I think it's better for them not to come into existence. But does not everyone die?
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
why
Everyone dies.
yeah, so
Um,
why is death not as much of an issue with other people? Like you and me, we're both going to die at some point.
it's not really
And we
the death
and
that
also
bothers
sorry,
me. It's the
just to add on to it, like neither of us two know how we're going to die. Like we could
yeah.
die in a horrible way.
My joke is always that I'm not going to live to see 35. Crawling up in maintenance tunnels really puts the number of you. I mean, I've personally seen in the last year, I've personally seen 3 people die
Oh,
on
wow. In
construction
in
sites.
in oh, wow, yeah.
So, uh, construction has the highest death rate next to the military.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So, no, I'm well aware I will die. The last person I saw pass, unfortunately, was only a couple years older than me,
Yeah, yeah.
and so it is always on my mind when I wake up in the morning and go to work that it could be my last day of being alive. I could go and a crane could drop a block on me or something, and it would just be over.
Yeah.
I think it's like how long far like a crane block is held, a good 6 feet off the base of the crane. It takes zero point 0.6 seconds for a crane block to hit the ground if it's disconnected, and it takes about a third of a second for your brain to process that it's falling at all.
Yeah.
So you physically the distance between the neurons to your legs makes it impossible for you to move out of the way.
Yeah. But but why would a death why would that death n- be not be a reason to not create someone, but the death of that child in a in a some awful situation, why is that death enough to say actually no, it's better for this person not to have been created?
That's a good question. But I would consider it not necessarily because of the death that I would say it's a
Right.
bad thing. I would say it's because you are bringing a child into the world, and it's going to be as close that as you could get to the because in my previous debates with antinatalists, I've
Mm.
gotten the life with nothing but suffering
Mm.
argument. That's
Mm.
about as close as you'll get to that in real life. Because I mean,
Mm.
obviously, it's a hypothetical life with nothing but suffering, but that's about as close as you can get to that. You're
Mm.
gonna the first feelings you'll feel in life are withdrawal,
Mm.
and if that doesn't kill you, those houses usually are very dirty.
Yeah.
You'll have scabies, mange, the diseases.
Yeah. 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 So
It's not good.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily just the death, although that maybe it's part of it, but it's that the just the overwhelming experience of that individual being created is just one of suffering.
It is needless,
Yeah,
needless suffering,
needless suffering.
because
Would
they don't
yeah.
those children are brought into the world, um, and they don't ever get a chance to do anything themselves. They don't ever get a
Mm,
chance to experience themselves. All they get is neglect.
mm. But one thing that I have with that is like all like every anyone created is going to experience some level of suffering, right?
Of
Um
course.
And some people who are created may even experience the same level of suffering as those children, just maybe in a different way or at a different part of their life. Maybe it's at the end of their life, because often people really go down at the end of their
Hmm.
lives, and a lot of the bad stuff concentrates to that end of their life, right? But you were saying that with those children, it's because the suffering is essentially meaningless because it didn't come alongside the opportunity to maybe reach their potential or do the things they would want to do and stuff like that, right? But maybe if the suffering comes at the end of your life, at least it's somewhat compensated by the fact that you've had these opportunities and stuff like that. But the thing that I would say to push back on that is that before any of these people were created, they didn't exist to want any of those opportunities, if you get what I mean. Like, the only reason that they want those opportunities and whatever it may be, I don't know, the opportunity to climb a mountain or to do some other great thing, the only reason they may want to do those things is because you created them in the first place, right? So it's sort of like there's no demand for the opportunities that you want to um, use as a compensation for the suffering you're imposing on someone. So you've kind of got to create the demand for it by creating someone, if you get what I mean. So it seems like there's a supply and demand problem. Like you want to supply someone with quote unquote these opportunities as a compensation for imposing harm on them, but there's no one there demanding it. What do you think about that?
I think that that would absolutely 100% make sense if I did not believe in my previous established opinion
Mm,
on entropy. I would completely 100% agree with you.
mm.
If I didn't think we had a responsibility.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. So it's like the most moral responsibility to do good elsewhere other than just in creating someone.
yes, if there was absolutely no purpose in life
Mm.
whatsoever, I would think that it would be completely heartless and cruel to have children.
So let's go back to my original questions and the second one. Why do you think one person gets to choose that is a valid compensation for the other person? The fact that they are a foot soldier in all of this.
So I actually will respond to that question with a question, and then I will answer it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I notice a lot of antinatalist arguments are about consent.
Mm,
And, you know, I live in a rural area. There's lots of drugs.
mm.
Is rehab unethical?
Um, I mean, it depends on the situation, but in the situation that we're both thinking of, I would say generally no, because it's in that person's interests to get clean, I would say.
Exactly. I mean, it is outside of their consent.
Mm,
You are violating this person's consent in their best interest, which that's a rabbit hole in of itself.
mm,
I've heard a lot of people who violate stuff for people's best interest, and you end
yeah,
up with artificial famine. But from this limited perspective,
yeah, yeah.
rehab is not unethical. I think it is in the best interest of a person to exist because it gives them. Because I don't believe in the validity of. It's like a lot of people say when they talk about things like new technologies that are going to be invented in the future.
Mm,
Why would we send a satellite out into space to take pictures if in 50 years we'll have a better satellite?
mm.
And the question I would ask then is, why not send both?
Mm,
Why? What are we holding out to for something that doesn't exist yet? We could very well in 50 years not have a better satellite, and now we've lost 50 years of data.
mm,
Because you are putting into a factor on your math problem something that does not exist yet. If I mean, shoot, think about the moral responsibilities that are now required if you're calculating for people who don't exist yet.
mm,
Oh my God, I could eat this apple and satiate my hunger, or I could plant the seeds for the people who don't exist yet. And if I eat my apple and then all the other apple trees die, and in 50 years that could have been an apple tree, now it's on my responsibility that all these people don't get apples. Now I'm a
mm.
horrible person because I stole apples from people from the future. Um, and I know that sounds like an exaggeration,
Mm.
but it is technically speaking the logical conclusion of that argument. If you
Yeah.
don't just stop at the unborn, you go and really push that one as far as it'll go. Um,
What? Why do you think? Because when we were talking about rehab, I was saying that the reason it may be in that circumstance, um, justifiable to force someone into rehab is because whilst they may not want to do it at that time, and so you're violating their consent, they will overall benefit from it because they will get clean, and then their quality of life will just be way better than afterwards. Now, I agree with you. There are a lot of people who may have that mindset, and it's sort of like, that saying, like, we're from the government and we've come here to help you. It's like that's
yes.
the worst thing you want to hear. So I 100% get what you mean. Like, there are often people who go around doing things with good intentions and it backfires. But and I also think that's another reason that people should not be creating other people, because they may do it with good intentions, but it could massively backfire. Like, let's just think about this for a minute. Like, when you create someone, you are creating them into a flesh suit, which is capable of incredible suffering, which is so delicate, it can be damaged in innumerable ways. And you can't guarantee what is going to happen to them, and you can't even guarantee that you're going to be around to help them. Like, you don't know what your relationship is going to be like to them. You don't know if you may be incapacitated in some way or even killed when they're 2 years old. Then they're growing up without a mother or a father, or even both in the case of an orphan. So it's also the case that the intentions don't necessarily justify the action here as well, even if it's well intentioned. But another thing I would say is that in the rehabilitation case, is that even if it goes well and your good intentions pay off and they get some sort of benefit, and it goes to serve some sort of interest they have, which is having a good quality of life. I don't think that example carries over to the case of creating someone, because before someone exists, they can't have, by definition, an interest to come into existence. Because to have an interest, there has to be someone who exists to have that interest.
I
And so I
completely
don't,
agree.
yeah, so I don't think we can say we're serving some sort of interest in creating them.
We're not serving their interest, no. You're
So it's for
you're
our interest.
fulfilling, well, it's fulfilling a responsibility. The responsibility to perpetuate the species so that there is someone left to care for the universe.
Right, okay. So
Again,
yeah.
back to my original
Yeah,
charge.
yeah. So it's not at all about them. It's 100% about the responsibility.
Yep, it's not even about the self. It is about the responsibility
Mm.
of human beings. Now, I believe that a lot of people don't do it for that reason,
Mm,
and I would
mm.
say
Yeah,
that is a wrong reason to have children.
yeah. Do you not think that sort of mindset of we are going to impose suffering on people um with no view of it being beneficial to them, but it's to serve this other purpose? Um do you not feel like that could, this could end up in some sort of gulag situation?
I think that that exact mentality is what stopped the Gulag situation. I mean, how
Oh,
did the
really?
individual boys benefit in World War II from the American side?
When you say the individual boys, sorry, what do you mean?
The soldiers. How did the
Mm.
American soldiers benefit from being on the front lines? I guarantee you, if you ask anybody who was on D-Day, they would tell you they did not benefit from that day.
Yeah.
But if we hadn't have done that, then there could have been serious problems. And obviously, of course, you can make the argument, oh, America didn't do it, but Russia helped, obviously.
Mm.
America and Russia stopped the Nazis. And that was a decision. They drafted those boys into that fight that did not benefit them at all. But without them, we could have seen the entire massacre of the Jewish
Mm.
population in Europe.
Yeah. No, I understand where you're coming from. Now, some people could ethically disagree with the draft, and I think they're entitled to do that. But someone could also argue that actually, ultimately, in the long term, it probably was in the interests of um, those soldiers, because if America or other countries hadn't intervened, um, then it could have been that Nazism won out, right? And when they get Europe, well, then it's going to pose an issue to other parts of the world, right?
Maybe
It may,
so, but not in the
yeah,
lifetime of those guys. It would have been a problem for their children, maybe.
perhaps, yeah, true. So, do you think then what would you draw from that? That
There are some responsibilities worth suffering for.
Okay, so would you go as far as to say that we can bring people into existence to harvest their organs, for example?
No, because I don't think that's a responsibility worth suffering for. I
Why
think
do you not think the lines are kind of arbitrary, like defeating Nazism or putting a leash on nature is
not
okay,
necessarily,
but organ harvesting is not okay?
because the reason I have the ideas that I do is I believe in the sanctity of life.
Mm,
Um, I don't believe in. I mean, I believe in the sanctity of life. I think life is sacred. It is our rarest resource in the universe. So far as we know, we are alone. We have never seen evidence ever of life ever being outside of our planet ever.
mm,
And even if there was, it'll be so far away that we might as well be alone. It is the rarest and most valuable resource. Um, and by resource, I don't mean like something to be harvested, but the rarest thing in the universe.
mm, mm,
And it's sacred. And so I don't think that the reason the Nazis were bad was because of their misanthropy. They had no issue with destroying people to get what they wanted in a completely selfish sense. And I mean, it could be even argued that when the Nazis started out, it was somewhat justifiable because of the way England and France treated the Nazis. But when Nazism became evil, was when it became misanthropic.
mm. So if we were to be able to get to a point where nature wasn't an issue, for example, um, what would be your view on procreation then? Do you think
That
it would be acceptable to impose that suffering on others?
maybe, maybe not. Um, of course, my mentality also comes with the fact that I'm not necessarily uh, Earth centric in my viewpoint. I
Mm,
think we have a sandbox outside that, I mean, it takes 7 months to get to the nearest planet. That's the same amount of time it took for the pilgrims to sail to the New World.
mm.
Technology is just going to get better. Um,
Do
so
you
I think
think?
we have a responsibility to cultivate anything that is cultivatable.
But do you think that's a good idea? Because I mean, if nature is so cruel and we need to be putting a leash on it, um, presumably, I mean, I'm sure if you're plugged into these conversations about going to Mars and the like, part of that conversation is terraforming, right? And establishing Earth-like biomes and ecosystems on
I
these
don't
other
know if
planets.
that's ever going to happen, but I hear the conversation. It's that is so science fiction that it's like, I don't know, Chief. That's we're talking like 1,000 years of getting resources from somewhere. But no, I
Mm,
mean, I'm in those conversations as well. Um, I don't know if we're gonna terraform Mars to be like Earth
mm,
because that's just very unrealistic. But it is cultivatable, and if anything, doing it on another planet actually is significantly easier than doing it on Earth because you don't have to fight nature the whole time. You only have to bring the stuff that you're bringing.
mm, mm,
And so on another planet, you could create a system that is significantly better than what's on Earth.
mm,
Significantly. Because you can screen everything. You wouldn't have to deal with viruses. You wouldn't have to deal with unwanted bacteria. The only thing that makes it to the rock is stuff that you specifically decide to take with you.
mm. So I want to go back to the example you were talking about with, how you said your, I think it was three other siblings are adopted, right?
Yes, sir.
And obviously, without going into detail, because I don't want to make it about your personal case, like, did they turn out, you know, like fine?
Yes, sir. It was we were worried at first, but they are very, very well rounded now.
Mm. So, if that's the case, just using that as a case study, but to zoom out for as a general point, does that not show that actually there are loads of people out there? I mean, in the US alone, I think there are something like 500,000 kids in the care system that need looking after, and all deserve parents, as you said
Hmm.
earlier in the conversation. Does that not does that not speak to you and say, well, actually, if the idea is to um, solve this issue of entropy, um, the main priority should be to adopt these children in, right?
I absolutely agree.
So,
Absolutely.
so do you think that any sort of ethically minded person, and anyone who thinks about these things, which we both are, do you not think we then have almost a moral obligation to not procreate and instead adopt? One, because obviously we know that we will be imposing suffering on a new person that we create, when we know that we could just as well, maybe not just as easily, because adoption and procreation are two different
It's Yeah,
situations,
it's
but
real hard to adopt, but
yeah, but you also have the avenue available to you to take someone on, which that in itself is a good thing. Like, you're doing a good thing by giving someone who needs a home, and hopefully cultivating a good life for them, instead of creating a new person who didn't exist to want to come into existence in the first place. And that seems like a better way forward to me, even if you're trying to achieve this goal of the entropy thing.
I completely agree. I just don't necessarily think those two things are mutually exclusive. My parents had two kids, me and my older
Mm.
brother, and adopted three.
True, but they could have adopted four, right?
We fostered over 20.
Yeah. No, no, that's good. But what
So
I'm
it's
saying
like,
is like there's an opportunity cost there if you're thinking it at it
of
from this point
course.
of view. Personally, I don't really think we should be viewing um, children or creating people as a form of almost activism. Um, I think to, as you said before, actually about responsibility, it seems it seems odd to me to impose a responsibility or duty on someone else um, who never existed to even take this on in the first place. It's almost like we've created them. They've now exist in this world where they've got to cobble together some sort of meaning and decent life. And then you've got their parents standing there saying, "Well, actually, I made you so that you can have the duty to fight entropy and go and make nature a better place." Do you not think
I
that
mean,
it just seems like a very odd and almost twisted justification to say to someone, especially if they may be in a situation themselves where they are suffering a lot. Like if you have, a kid and they get to 20 years old or something, and they, have clinical depression or something, and they're just having an awful time, and they come to you and say, like I'm really having a shit time. Like this is really not going well. The only thing you're going to be able to say to them was that, oh well, I did this in service of some lion somewhere.
Maybe. I think you come from this from a slightly different perspective that I do,
Mm,
um, which is obviously, I mean, it's obviously true because you're an antinatalist and I'm not. Um, but I think it's a very, like you said, it's a little disconnected from nature. I don't know your childhood or where you came from, but
mm,
um, having children as a way to make a nation is an inherently that is I mean, what do we define as normal? Do we define normal as like some arbitrary philosophy that we have, or do we define normal as what is actually happening in every single case? Why do plants grow acorns?
mm.
I mean, why do animals have children? And I know that's like I'm comparing humans to animals or whatever, but what I'm saying is like that is what's normal. It is a normal to think otherwise. And
Mm.
I think that that's worth considering. But it's not weird
But do you
because
think?
it is the
Yeah.
natural state of the universe.
But do you think that just because something's normal makes that sort of makes it de facto a justification?
Absolutely not. But I'm just saying that it's not weird to do that. That is normal. It is weird to think otherwise. It may be ethically better to do otherwise, but it's not weird to have children to impose responsibility on them because that's been the state of humanity since we've
Yeah.
existed.
But again, it being normal isn't a justification for it, right?
No, it's not a justification for it. But I was just saying it was strange to me that you said that it's weird. But I'll
Well,
continue
yeah, yeah.
from
The weird bit was specifically about the case with nature. I think that would be weird. Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to find
yeah,
someone who says I had a
probably.
kid. Yeah, uh,
Well, because I would be having a child for because it's because it is my charge to produce and multiply. That's the the charge of humanity
mm.
as according to Christianity. But
So it isn't about nature then.
no, it is because that is one of the many different charges you have. Is why do you reproduce and multiply? There's multiple reasons for things.
Mm,
Um, it, and I don't know if you care about religion at all, but very very seldom in Christianity is anything done for a single purpose.
mm,
I think it really pisses me off when I see people in church. A lot of pastors will preach like God is a very easily predictable thing. If you read the Old Testament or the New Testament, it's 99.9% of shit they say in church is completely false.
mm,
Like directly contrary to what is said in the book.
mm,
And so it makes it very, very difficult to talk about Christianity at all because so many people are like, oh my God, in my area, you have the full quiver movement, which I find abhorrent, where they're like, well, God told us to reproduce and multiply. So we need to have children every single time we're physically capable of having children until my wife dies.
mm.
And I'm like, that is fundamentally offensive to me. It's it's a very offensive. It's blasphemous even. Um, and you see like the people who put big signs up like God hates gays
Yeah, the
and all that stuff.
Westboro Baptist Church, right?
Yes, that it's like y'all completely misunderstood the the fundamental message, and that's very common. And
Mm,
so when I say, you know, God gave us a charge to reproduce and multiply. I'm not saying, oh, that's the only reason we have kids is God just said pump out children. That's not the case at all. Um, According to Scripture, we are the reason humans are different from animals is because we have imago Dei, or in Hebrew it's ruach. It's we have a soul. That's
Mm.
why we are, and whether that is legitimate or not, that's not for me to say. But I can say, from a objective standpoint, nobody else drives cars besides human beings.
Mm.
We are so much more intelligent than even the most intelligent animals that it honestly is laughable to even compare us in the same books. Them.
But also, no one else flies bombs, like planes into buildings, right?
No, but I'll say killing things is not human centric. We are able to do it more than other things are. But if you ever see the migratory patterns of ants, I'm an
Mm.
entomology nerd. If you look at the migratory ants in South America, millions of ants will die in a single skirmish. I mean,
Mm.
they'll spray acid at each other.
Mm.
They'll gnaw each other's limbs off. Uh, so that is killing each other is the natural state of the universe. Humans are uniquely gifted in our ability to not do that.
Do you believe in a conception of hell?
I think that hell is. I think that everything that makes heaven good and everything that makes hell bad is already existent in some way on earth, just in an exaggerated form. I think hell is the um, obsession with the self.
Mm.
I don't necessarily think God is like, oh, I don't like you, I'm throwing you in the pit of fire. That's not what's said in Scripture. What it describes hell is metaphorically a lake of fire, but not physically a lake of fire. It says that
Mm.
God gives people up to their whims, and basically you see a world without meaning, a constant suffering because you yourself are choosing to suffer through like hell is not a punishment. Hell is you chose, you do not want God, so God does not force himself on you, and hell is the natural state of life without meaning.
So hell doesn't exist in some sort of form of afterlife. It's a metaphor for potential forms of life in the
That
here
is
and
that
now.
is an interpretation. It could also be an afterlife, but
Mm.
everything that makes hell bad already exists.
But what do you believe? Do you believe there is somewhere that like people can go that is a negative place
Y-
after
yes,
they've
but I
died,
don't
obviously?
think you go there without choosing it. I think you choose hell.
Okay.
You have to want
What,
it.
consciously, or
Yes.
who do you think would do that?
I would actually think I myself could consider it because it's not like because when people think of oh I'm going to choose to go to hell because it's like oh it's because it's a lake of fire and everything. That is not what is biblically explained. Um, Hell is not a punishment. Hell is the logical extension of not wanting to have a relationship with God. So if you don't like him, he doesn't force himself on you. And it is metaphorically seen as a lake of fire because it's you are choosing to put yourself there, but it is
Mm.
not ideal
But I mean,
from a outside of humanity
yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, so what I was saying before is with the lake of fire metaphor, like obviously an actual lake of fire would be like awful, terrible, like one of the worst things you can imagine. Um,
Absolutely.
and so even if the lake even if the lake of fire isn't literal, metaphorically, surely it must be referring to something that is either as bad or nearly as bad. Otherwise they would have used a less harsh metaphor, right? So
Yes.
Yeah, so surely even if that doesn't accurately represent hell in a literal sense, surely hell is still a really bad place to be in.
It's not a place I would want to be, no. In
So
in this life or in the next.
so do you not see an ethical problem with creating someone w- given there's a chance they may go to hell? Even if even if they choose to go there, because I think putting someone in a situation where they will maybe they may unintentionally go there, or they may intentionally make a decision to cause significant harm to themselves, like put themselves in a really bad situation. I don't think it's ethically justifiable to you to put someone in that position in the first place.
I I could see where you'd be coming from, but at the same time, I can't also see how it would be ethically justified for you to force people to be in a relationship with yourself.
What do you mean be in a relationship with yourself?
Because what makes heaven, because you understand, let me try to find a way to explain this. Um, the fundamental foundations of Christianity
Yeah.
is the pursuit of an infinite, unknowable God,
Mm,
because every single aspect of creation is kind of like a when you have, like watching claymation, when you see someone animating in stop motion with a supple medium, you
mm,
can see fingerprints imprinted on everything, and you can learn a little bit about the touch of the person working with it because you can see what they're doing.
mm,
Um, every single science, every single exploration of art or philosophy is in some way uh, exploring the various systems that have been created by God, whatever God or it is.
yeah.
Um, Even if it's just a force outside of nature that just is like a force like gravity, um, it's still unknowable because it's outside of the system that we understand as
Mm,
the universe. And that's what I mean by relationship. The studying of that.
mm,
What makes heaven good is that you finally found the thing in humanity that never can bore you, because every single new discovery on it is a completely unknowable, mind blowing discovery for eternity.
mm,
So heaven is not necessarily, oh, I'm sitting on my cloud with a harp. It is humans able to perfectly do what humans are supposed to do as ordained.
mm,
Hell is saying, oh, I don't want to do that. I choose to instead live only for myself and be an animal, rejecting my charge, and it is not ideal in an objective standpoint. But to a lot of people, it would be ideal inside their dichotomy.
yeah. So I'm not sure that answers the question of like, because when you create someone from this specific Christian worldview, which I personally don't share, but from within that worldview, you are putting someone in a situation where they will suffer somewhat in this life, and potentially to a massive degree, but they also have the potential of going to hell, which presumably no one would want to be the cause of someone else going to hell, right?
No, I
Which
wouldn't personally want to do that either.
exactly, but if you have a kid and they end up going to hell, ultimately you are somewhat responsible for that because you were the one who chose to put them in the situation where they could go to hell in the first place, right? Uh,
Arguably, yeah.
yeah, and so to justify that by appealing to heaven as a counterweight is appealing to something which they never existed to want in the first place. So it's essentially saying this individual who doesn't exist doesn't want to suffer or potentially go to hell, but I'm going to impose that on them. And to justify that, I'm going to appeal to this other thing which they don't exist to want as well. To me, that doesn't make sense.
Well, I think that's entirely focusing on a framework of what you want versus what you don't, when in reality it's a framework of responsibilities versus not responsibilities.
Mm,
Uh, my responsibility is to nurture and show the image of God on earth by nurturing and pruning and making the world a better place. And then part of that is having children. It's not my responsibility to dictate where people choose to go when they die.
Mm,
Um, that's their responsibility. I mean, it's the same thing as not planting an apple seed in the ground and then kicking myself when it doesn't feed a child in the future who then doesn't have an apple. It's
but you could also choose just not to create that child, so there's no one to need the apple.
I could do that. Just like you said, our family could have adopted a fourth child, um, but it doesn't make much difference in the long run
Well,
when it comes to
yeah.
like I think there's like this weird mixed responsibilities with the antinatalism mindset where it's like, well, I'm not going to judge myself for the unborn that I don't produce
Mm,
but will exist anyway. I'm only going to judge myself for the unborn that I produce, but only if but I'm only going to look at the negatives. I'm never going to look at the anything else because I mean it does exist in equal parts. There is a lot of suffering in life, but you're only looking at the suffering and refusing to acknowledge anything besides the responsibilities of not wanting to bring children into the world. It's like a very a single issue philosophy.
mm. I do think when someone exists, both the bad and good things in life are important to take into account. But that's when someone already exists. When someone doesn't exist yet, I don't think there is really a responsibility for you to take into account the good things that could happen to them. And I think you only really have a responsibility to think about the bad things that could happen to them concerning that individual person. And the reason I think that is because if you think about, let's say, there's a couple, and they're thinking about whether to have a baby, and they go to the doctor to have a scan or whatever, and the doctor says you've got some sort of unusual condition where if you create this person, they're going to have an awful life, some sort of debilitating genetic disease or whatever. Um, Now, I think the vast majority of people would agree, and I would argue for this, that not only do they not have an obligation to create that child, I think they have an obligation not to create that child, if you get what I
I
mean.
could agree with that. If you have
Yeah,
like, for example, if you get married and both of you are like 40 to 50 years old, the
yeah,
chances of genetic problems at that age
exactly.
because of a lack of fertility
Very
makes it
high.
like
Yeah.
do not have a child at that age. That
Yeah.
is a window lost. If you want kids, adopt.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that helps to establish the fact that we do need to take into account the bad things that could happen to a child.
Oh, I completely agree. I
Yeah. But
100% agree.
yeah, but on the flip side, if you had another couple who went and the doctor said, "Hey, look, you two have got really good genetics. Like if you had a kid, that kid would have a really good life. Once they exist, they would have a really good life." I don't think I would argue that they don't have an obligation to create that child. Like if they create the child, it is good that the child has a good life because if someone exists, we want everyone to have a great life, right? But I don't think they have an actual obligation to create that child because the child doesn't exist at this point in time to want to be created. Like the good life is nothing to them. They don't exist. So to me that shows that when thinking from the point of view of creating someone, not someone who already exists, but thinking of the point of view of creating someone, we have this obligation to take into account the harm that will be done to that person. But we don't really need to consider the good things that could come when they're alive because, well, for the reasons that I explained before.
I could see that argument being made if we had no responsibilities outside of ourselves. Yes, I could see that
So it's the
being a thing.
responsibilities that you come back to.
Yeah, that,
Yeah.
unfortunately that is where I have
So
to come back to.
yeah, but so you referred before. I don't think you explicitly said it, but you referred before that God doesn't impose Himself on people if people don't want Him, right?
No,
or I'm using him, but like whatever.
it
I don't.
or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah,
it's whatever.
it
Whatever you want to
the
use. Yeah,
idea of God does not
exactly
impose
the idea
itself.
of God. So presumably, if God doesn't want to
Because
impose,
I'll call myself
yeah,
I'll call myself a Christian, but a lot of Christians don't like my theology.
yeah, yeah. But if you think that God doesn't want to impose Himself on others, presumably you think that also individual people should not be imposing their religion on others as well, or do you think what do you think about that?
I could see why the argument could be made, but you're not really imposing anything on anybody. Philosophy cannot really be imposed unless it's being like a
If it informs actions, it can.
philosophy really can't be imposed. You can force people to fake it. Say that again.
If philosophy informs actions, those actions can impose something on someone.
Well, of course, but you can't impose the philosophy itself. You can't
Well,
force
you
someone.
can through indoctrination.
Maybe so, but I would say the responsibility still lies in the person who is having the philosophy. You can
Mm,
indoctrinate somebody, but the responsibility still lies to the person to look into it. Like, because that would inform the argument. Like, I I hate bringing Nazis into every single conversation, but it's a very good socially understood concept.
yeah, yeah.
The 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 generals in the concentration camps who said they were just following orders were still responsible for their actions. You know?
Can you repeat that? It cut out for a minute.
Oh, I said
I heard the
the
generals in
the
the concentration
generals.
camps. Yeah.
Yeah, they were the generals in the concentration camps. Even though they said that they were just following orders, they were
Mm,
still responsible for their actions.
yeah, yeah.
And they could have been indoctrinated. They could have really thought the people that they were putting inside concentration camps were
Mm,
horrible, horrible people, but it didn't. But they were still held responsible for the fact that they did not stand up against what was evil,
no, I
um,
understand that. And
even
when
if
I
they were
say,
indoctrinated, because it is the responsibility of the individual to say
sorry,
again.
no, no, sorry, you finished. We've got a delay at the moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just I think that people have a responsibility to actually look into what they're being told. If you
Mm,
just accept indoctrination and believe what you're told, then when you do something horrible based on that like wrong worldview, I think it's their responsibility.
yeah.
If and I constantly have to look back and check to myself and be like, oh, okay, and I look into. I think I personally own like 8 different holy books from 8 different religions.
Mm,
I think I own a Quran. I own like Buddhist texts. Um, because I think that there can be something gleaned from there's truth and lies in everything,
mm,
and I have to constantly check myself
mm.
because I don't want to if there's nothing at the end when I'm dead it I didn't lose anything, but there's no excuse that I just didn't look hard enough for the truth.
Mm. But when I was talking about imposing
I
religion
mean
on
that's why I'm
someone,
even having this conversation at all because
yeah,
I'm fascinated to hear your perspective.
yeah. When I said about imposing religion on someone else, I didn't necessarily mean imposing it in an intellectual way in terms of forcing someone to believe it. I think I think because and you were saying that even if someone is forced to believe something, there is some amount of personal responsibility there. I think that can be true. I don't think it's also always true because I think a lot of indoctrination, especially religious indoctrination, is done in childhood when the child doesn't have their rational faculties to be able to um, really be held accountable for the views that they take on. Um, but separate from that, when I was talking about forcing religion on someone, it wasn't necessarily forcing people to believe a certain thing. It was coercing their actions um, because you believe a certain religious thing. So it could be um, the fusing of church and state so that people's lives are controlled from a religious framework rather than in a secular framework where people are free to practice their religions privately and they should not be persecuted for that, but they don't, through a legal system, impose their religions on each other. um, do you think in that way that religion should not be imposed?
Yes, absolutely. Um, it would be the same thing that if, like, say, I was an antinatalist and I believed having children was wrong, so
Mm,
I shot anybody who had a child or made it
yeah,
illegal and put them in jail. I mean, like, it's. I think that's for any philosophy. I think
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
if you're coercing someone into your philosophy, that puts you in as firmly as the bad
Mm,
guy in the little dichotomy that you're in.
yeah. So,
Um,
do you not, because an antinatalist would then say that almost inherently by having a child, you are coercing someone and forcing something on someone. You're forcing natalism on them, the idea that life is good, otherwise you wouldn't be creating them. But also, if you're doing it with religious justification, you are in almost the most significant way possible forcing your religion on someone else.
Maybe so. But at that point, I'm forcing my religion on someone who doesn't exist yet.
Well,
And
well, well, no, the forcing starts when they're created, so they will exist.
I'm not forcing really anything because there's nothing to force until they exist because they don't exist yet.
Yeah, so you're not actively forcing it on someone who doesn't exist, but once they are created, that's when the forcing is taken place. And then the forcing is buttressed by the following, if it's from a religious framework, presumably the following indoctrination after that.
Well, of course. And when they become an adult, and if they find something else that they like better, and they choose to ignore everything that I've told them, you don't resent them for that.
No, I think yeah, people shouldn't resent others who decide to reject religion, but just the fact that they are free to reject it when they're an adult doesn't mean that the forcing didn't take place initially, and also the forcing of the circumstances of life have still occurred.
Maybe so. I think that that mentality is a little. I mean, I see. It's the. I now understand why you think having children would be bad.
Mm,
Um, because there's no way to have any sort of child without forcing them to do something.
mm,
Um, so I can recognize that where that would be the case. But then I would also say, what's the point of a law? You're forcing people to follow a philosophy that they could disagree with,
mm,
even though we just as society have decided that murder is wrong, for example, or that thievery is wrong. Even if I'm starving to death, I can't break into a Walmart and
mm.
steal a bunch of Krispy Kremes off the shelf and run outside.
Mm.
That is a philosophy that
Yeah.
society dictates.
Yeah,
So
true. I think when it comes to law, I think law is a practical necessity. It's essentially saying, look, we all exist now here, and we all have different interests that we are going to pursue, but we need to balance off each other because we've got to be mature and recognize that I have interests that I have now had forced upon me. Um, but you also all do too. And so we need to come up with some sort of structure that allows us in some way to balance those interests off each other. Now, it's not going to be perfect and there should be mechanisms for reform. But I think what antinatalists would say, and I would say myself, is that's an imperfect framework for people who already exist. The best thing is just not to put them in that situation in the first place.
maybe so, but it seems rather defeatist.
I don't think so. I think, imagine if you live in a nice area of town and um, next to you is an area of town which is really horrible. There's a lot of stabbing, stuff like that. Um,
I live in that part of town.
yeah. But if you were going to send your child somewhere, um, you wouldn't want to send them through the bad part of town, right?
Probably
Um,
not. No.
No, and the reason you don't do that is because you realize that they don't need to come to any harm. and by sending them there, they most likely will come to harm, or they're guaranteed to come to some harm. I don't think it's a defeatist attitude not to send them there, and that's what antinatalists are doing. They're saying life contains a significant amount of harm and a guarantee of death. And if you're religious and have a conception of hell, there's also the potential of going to hell. And all we say is, let's not put someone in that situation, also taking into account they have no interest in coming into that situation in the first place. I don't think that's a defeatist attitude. I think it's just a realistic and reasonable attitude.
Well, see, the reason why I'm misunderstanding your example there is saying
Mm.
there's a bad side of town, so it's not I'm not choosing to send my child through the bad side of town. It's there's a bad side of town, so I'm not going to have a child to begin with, just so I never have to be in the situation where I maybe have to maybe send them through the bad side of town. That's where I think it's a little defeatist. You can't even have the child go through the good side of town because you never had him to begin with.
True, but if the analogy was to hold, then in every direction of your house, there's going to be a bad side of town because everyone's guaranteed to have bad in their life, and everyone has the guarantee of death, right?
Yeah, but I don't necessarily think of death as a particularly bad thing. I mean, death is no
Maybe.
different than never being born.
Well, no, I mean, I think the once you're dead, that's true. Um, but the process of dying is definitely something that I think is negative for the vast majority of people. And also, we've got to recognize that even if we don't have a negative perception of death, we're imposing death on someone else without having any idea of what their perception of death is going to be.
I understand that, but my question is, the ultimate goal of antinatalism is voluntary extinction, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Well, antinatalism itself is a philosophy, so it doesn't have a goal in itself.
Okay,
But so you'd have to
you're
ask
correct.
individual people. But so my if I was going to give my personal opinion, the goal is not extinction. It's a practical consequence of the goal. The goal is just to stop bringing new individuals here. But if we stop
Okay,
bringing new individuals here, obviously extinction will then happen. But extinction isn't necessarily technically the goal.
okay, I understand that much. So my question would then be post-human extinction,
Mm,
right? Nobody is around to talk about morality. No one is
mm.
around to talk about anything. Uh, why would it have mattered what we had done?
I don't think it would matter at that point, but I think it matters to us whilst we are here. Like, I don't think there's some sort of objective thing written somewhere in the universe that says this is good, this is bad. But we can all recognize here now that each of us care about certain things. Um, and the most fundamental thing is that we all care about our own suffering and the frustration of our interests. And so I think a mature person would say that we each have to cooperate with each other to try and flourish as best we can as individuals without imposing on each other. And I think the ultimate imposition is creating someone.
Maybe so. I could definitely see where you're coming from.
Mm,
Um, I could definitely see, but it's without a moral framework. It all seems a little arbitrary, in my opinion. It's like
mm,
if there is no definitive good or bad, it really is just all what we decide good or bad to be.
mm,
Like there's a tribe, like the Karankawa tribe here in Texas. When settlers first came in, they were cannibals.
mm,
They saw absolutely no problem with cannibalism as a society. Um, who's to say that they weren't right?
mm. I'm hesitant to answer the question because it gets into the whole thing of whether morality is subjective or objective. And we have already been going for 2 hours,
I'm sorry, man.
and I've got something in 5 minutes that I've got to go to. Um, but I also don't want to be seen to be dodging the question. So
I totally get you. I
what?
totally get you.
But what I can say is, if you want, I won't. As I've been saying before, I don't like imposing things on people, so I won't impose this on you. But if you would like to have a second discussion, you can message me anytime, and we can start
I
with
would
that
love to.
question.
That'd be awesome.
Um, so Yeah, we can do that. Let's round off here, and then we can start off with that, and yeah, because that would just be a more general discussion about subjective, objective morality. Maybe we can find a way to tie it more closely to antinatalism somehow.
Yeah, I'm sorry about
But no,
the
no, no,
tangential stuff.
no. It's all good. It's all good. I enjoy the tangents. That the journey is funner than the destination often, right? So,
Sure.
um, but yeah. Um, if obviously I will include any links you want me to in the description and stuff, but um, can you guide people to anywhere if they want to follow the stuff you do? Is it just your YouTube channel, or are there other places? Or
I've got a YouTube. I've got like a little Instagram account. I'll post it around. I'll send it
okay,
to who I can. Most of the people who see my stuff I know in person, so it'll probably be
mm,
mostly word of mouth. But I totally will send anyone I can this way.
mm. Cool. No, amazing. Thank you. And I'll include the link in the description to your YouTube channel and the Instagram account.
Thank you, man.
Anything you send to me. Um, but thanks so much for coming on, Isaac. I've enjoyed it, and it's been nice to speak to someone who, whilst you disagree, and we didn't fully get into the extent of our disagreements, but I think in terms of our worldviews, like we massively disagree on a
It's a
whole
pretty
range of
big schism.
things. Yeah, but it's nice to be able to talk to someone in a civil way, right? Even though you fundamentally
Sure,
disagree with them on a range
absolutely.
of things. So, yeah, thank you for coming on. I've really enjoyed it.
I like the fact that I can have these conversations because I don't get to like think about stuff a whole lot when I'm in a
Mm,
conversation.
mm,
Mostly my thinking goes to like bending metal conduit. So
yeah.
philosophy is nice every once in a while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's been good. So cheers for coming on.
Absolutely.